Emergency brakes are not hooked back up yet. 9-inch is tucked right up in there, nice and tight. It looks mean. This thing looks freaking mean. I mean, we've got the whole back end of this car set up and ready to go. Just got to do some adjusting and fine tuning. I am super happy with how this thing looks. 100% the sleeper car, patina car vibe that I was going for. Like I said, I'm super happy with the way it sits. Sits like your stock Nova. Woo. Alright guys, so as you can see, the car is back on the ground. It still needs a few things to really finish it up and be done. But the rear's in, the rear suspension's in, and the car's back on its own weight. So we still need to get a drive shaft for this, finish installing the emergency brake cables, and we still got to bleed the brakes, and adjust the Cal-Trac bars. Now that the car is on the ground, I wanted to circle back to actually putting this stuff in and let you know some of the issues that we ran into, because we hit quite a few roadblocks in wrapping up this rear end. So the first major thing that was just a nightmare was aftermarket brake line. Alright guys, I just got done wrestling this out of the car, the old brake line. And you can see that, like, so this main brake line that runs through the length of the car is really long. So one thing that I would definitely recommend, while you got this front spring perch and no subframe connectors in the way, the brake line loops underneath all this stuff. So it would definitely be easier and more straightforward just to pull it out while there's nothing in the way. Now let's try and wrestle the new one in there. Alright, let me update you guys. We've spent all morning fighting with aftermarket stainless steel brake line. That is most definitely the wrong brake line. No sooner do we get done sweeping out the garage, the brake line shows up. Hopefully this is the right brake line. I wanted to show you the difference between the original brake line, the new brake line, and the new brake line that we already tried to install. If you look at the original brake line, it's really long and it's got all these swoops going on here. Both reproduction ones, they eliminate all the extra swoops and it's more of just a straight shot. So this was the one that we originally tried to put in that didn't work. I mean, this thing's cheap. This was the Right Stuff detailing version. There's only a couple bends that actually have that, I don't know what you would call this. If you look at the new brake line that we got from Inline Tube, you can see that just like the factory line, it's coated in this spring type protection the entire length of the line. So I just did like a quick mock-up underneath the car to see how it looked without having these swoops in it. And it looks like this is gonna be right. Kind of one of those things where you don't know till you know. So here we go. Let me tell you, that brake line fit great. Other than the front here, trying to weave up around the steering box and the frame rail to get up to the actual proportioning valve that's up here. The rest of it was super easy and the bends were perfect. Just with a brake line that's that long and, you know, having all this stuff in the way. Like if the frame rail wasn't in the way here and we didn't install the subframe connectors and that leaf spring perch was still out, it would have been way easier. Even with all that stuff in the way, we still made it work. The next big setback was the subframe connectors. One thing I did call Calvert about and ask was about their polyurethane bushings that go with these rear shackles. So I asked them what they recommend, if anything, as far as a grease or a lubricant, because if you're familiar with a polyurethane bushing inside a metal surface, it squeaks like crazy. So to try and eliminate some of that squeaking noise, I asked them what they would recommend, and the answer that they gave me was just to use a bearing grease. So that's all this is a waterproof, high temperature bearing grease that you get from like your local Napa Auto Parts. We've attempted to install the leaf springs, where we quickly discovered that the front spring perch bolt combined with the Competition Engineering subframe connectors does not work. Hopefully you can see this. So we kind of have a problem here. This is the bolt that goes through the front of the leaf spring perch, which now holds all of our Cal-Trac assembly and the front of the leaf spring. And that's the back of the subframe connector. And we're smashing right into it. We still got a ways to go here on that bolt before we're actually through this leaf spring perch here. Unfortunately, it looks like everything that we did the other night is gonna have to come back apart. Race cars. All right, guys, subframe connectors are out. And now you can see how much of this was exactly my fault. If I had read the instructions and actually looked at this area of the subframe connector before I installed it in the car, the instructions say that because of the difference in stamping of these, that you may need to notch this. And I mean, it's not even close. So we're gonna notch it right in here. Let's start cutting. Now that I know the definition of some slight modifying, you basically have to shave. There's a lip that goes here. You have to grind that whole lip off so that when this is actually under the car, you'll be able to just barely sneak the 3/4 inch wrench on here to grab the nut once the bracket's on there. And you basically have to make the most perfect notch in here so that you can actually get that nut. Actually, I think the nut goes that way. Anyway, you get the idea. It takes some precision fitting to make sure that this all works. Because the main thing that I didn't want to do was I didn't want to cut any of these welds off, and because this is actually boxed. So I wanted to make sure that we could make these cuts without compromising the subframe connector. Even though I cut in some of the, into some of the welds, I didn't want to expose or cut through the welds so that the subframe connector was no longer boxed. Let's get to putting this thing back in again. Then we ran into an issue with the rear actually centering on the new leaf springs. I can't get this dowel pin to line up.
Oh, you can't get the rear on the dowel on the spring.
Dude, I don't think it's gonna sit on that pin. It's not gonna work. Dowel sticking up.
Is 1/2 inch.
It's almost 1/2 inch. If you have the original perches installed, you will need our spacer adapter plates. Let me show you the key part that kept us from actually being able to lower the rear down on the leaf springs the other night. So, if you're running a Calvert split Monoleaf style spring on factory spring perches, which even though this is a custom rear, I had this rear built to bolt right into a 68 to 74 Nova. If you're going to run their split monos on a factory style rear spring setup, you have to run these adapter plates. It's just a 1/2 inch thick spacer. These need to go on the top of the spring and in between the perch, because there's actually a dowel pin that runs through that split Monoleaf, which right now is just crashing into the spring perch and not allowing the rear to sit flush on the spring. That's the one part that I missed when we were setting up this suspension. So these are required. Calvert wants you to weld these guys in. We're gonna get them all in, and we'll probably do the welding on it later. They actually want you, when this is sitting on top of the spring and in between the spring perch, to weld at the front here on both sides. So we'll probably wait till everything's back together and the car's running and driving, drive it over to our buddy's house so we can throw it up on a lift and weld it that way. It's gonna be way easier to weld in front of you than on the floor upside down underneath you. So we also discovered that the bolts we were going to use to hold the leaf springs to the rear were too short because of that block. Problem number 2. I wanted to use these factory studs that are splined that hold together the top of the leaf spring perch to the new Calvert perch on the bottom that holds the shocks. But the problem is with that 1/2-inch spacer, these are no longer long enough. So it looks like we're gonna have to go get some U-bolts, which is something that I was kind of trying to stay away from because it would look cleaner without the U-bolts. I don't know what else to do with it now, so that's what we're gonna have to do. So after driving around all night looking for U-bolts, between 2 different stores, we finally found 4 U-bolts to bolt this rear end. As you can see, 2 of them are not painted, 2 of them are painted. So what we're gonna do is we're just gonna paint them all, even the ones that are painted black. We're gonna repaint them black so that they're the same black, and let these dry overnight. And then tomorrow morning, we should be bolting the rear into the car. So we've got our U-bolts all painted up. We've got lock washers, flat washers. So now we can put this thing back together. Then we discovered that the QA1 double adjustable shocks were hitting our backing plate. Alright guys, so with the new Calvert Racing bottom spring perch, unlike the original one that has 2 tabs and the shock mounts in between the tabs, the Calvert one just has a single ear. So what we need to make that work so that you don't just bend the bolt at the bottom of the shock is you need one of these shock studs. I'll put the link in the description, the one that we're using here with the QA1 shocks. But you can see that we're gonna have to press the sleeve out of the bottom bushing of the shock and then press this guy in here. And what this is gonna do is go through the Calvert Racing bottom perch and allow that to sit on there without bending the stud. So let's get these pressed out so we can hang these rear shocks. Look at that, 2 birds with 1 stone. Old one out and new one in. Further modification is going to be required here. So we're just starting to put the shocks on, and what I realized is we have a double adjustable shock, the new shock studs that I showed you, but the problem is now we're hitting on the backing plate the knobs for the adjusters, and if I just flip the shock around to go the other way, the problem is now the adjusters are in the way of the heavy duty spring brackets. So what we're gonna have to do here is I'm gonna mark this with some paint, take the shock back off, and we're gonna just take a grinder to this backing plate a little bit and just shave some material off so that we have enough room to actually be able to adjust that dial and not fear that that dial is gonna smash into the backing plate. So everything just bolts right in. When you're hacking up your stuff and don't want to like spray paint and get overspray all over everything, find yourself one of these paint markers. This has been a lifesaver for fixing all my scratches, grinding, coloring the lines. We're all done modifying the backing plates so that the shocks fit and we still have some adjustment. I mean, it's tight. We'll see what it looks like on the ground. I'm hoping, like, at least it's not smashed up against it to the point where it's going to break the shock, but it might still be a process to actually be able to adjust that dial. So we'll see what that looks like once we actually get this thing down. But we're at the point now where I've modified both the backing plates, hit them with a little bit of that black paint stick, and now we just got to finish tightening up the shocks and then throw some wheels on this thing and see if we can set it back down on the ground. Then lug nuts. Alright guys, I don't know what I was thinking. Here we go again. Almost had it. The factory lugs, yeah, they're not gonna work. This is a larger size stud. So we need lug nuts. Darn. Let me, at least it's early enough in the day that I think I can probably get something today. But I still want to get this thing down on the ground, maybe, at least jacked up, so I can get the Cal-Trac bars on there. I gotta see what it looks like, so we might set it down with 2 lugs. I don't know, we'll see. And lastly, we discovered that the drive shaft is too short. But despite all that, the car's back together, it's on the ground. We still got the few things that we need to wrap up to get this thing back on the road and driving. And we're gonna run it with the 6-cylinder, the Power Glide, and now the new beefy rear end setup with all the new suspension. So the main thing with this car is I wanna keep making, you know, major performance upgrades to it, but still be able to drive it. Because being able to drive it is, to me, is way better than a car that's blown apart in, you know, your garage or at a body shop, and it's much more enjoyable for a project to be able to keep using it and just to be able to move it around and not have to push it everywhere. That's the intent of this channel, is to show you that we can make big performance upgrades to this car little at a time and still be able to use it while we make those changes. The great news is that the Power Glide transmission and the Short Tail 350 transmission that we're going to put in this are the exact same length. So we're going to order the right drive shaft right now, and that drive shaft's going to work with this Power Glide, and it's also going to work with that beefier 350 that we're going to put in this thing once we do the V8 swap. So stay tuned, guys. We got more content coming. We're going to show you how to adjust these Calvert racing Cal-Trac bars, that drive shaft that we're going to order for this thing, and we're going to keep the videos coming. So make sure you like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time. And we got to clean up this mess. It's got a little out of control.